this morning we are going to just have another wee refresher look at the subsidy tests. We've always known them as the tests, but they're really the definition, or how they're being defined, or how state aid was and how the new subsidy control is defined, what the definition is. There's very subtle difference between the wording of and the kind of inference behind some of the tests, particularly the effect on trade one, which we'll talk about. And I'm also going to show you what's in the new UK bill and what might be turning up. I'm going to switch off the transcript option because it's showing me what I'm saying on the right hand side, and it's very distracting.
So you say it,
especially when the transcript isn't what I'm actually saying. It just makes me realise I have to be careful with my diction. So we're gonna have a look at the sort of forward look at the direction of travel and what might be coming next year, and then also what I want to reinforce is it's all very well doing the test, but you have to record your thinking, you know, why you've reached the conclusion that you have, and that's a very important part of the process. So here we are. So on the left-hand side, you should see the wording that was used, which you should be familiar with from the past of the old state aid tests. And on the right-hand column, I've got what has come out of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. There is different. I'm not going to bother going into the definition of subsidy within the WTO rules because it's similar. So most of what we're doing is falling within the TCA. And then we'll have a look at what's coming next year. So we've talked about the Parliamo subsidy and the sort of changing kind of language. So instead of an undertaking that we had in state aid, we've got an economic actor, which means the same thing. So is the beneficiary involved in trading goods or services on a market? And as we all know, that depends on, or we should remember that depends on the activity that we're supporting, not necessarily what they do normally. So a local authority who normally provides services for free, when they are involved in property or when they are running leisure services or possibly even charging for our bins, but I don't think that really counts. It's still probably a fraction of what it costs to collect our bins. So it's divorcing what they would normally do. So similarly for a community enterprise, if they're normally involved in just providing free services or support for their area, but then they set up a subsidiary that's trading, then they become a economic actor. And I think the good news is it sounds as though it's going to become an enterprise, back to being an enterprise, and something that we understand next year. Second test or second part of the definition, again, is similar, transfer of state resources that we had before. And we're looking, does the assistance arise from public resources? So the subtle difference there is, remember, if support had come direct from the EU, it wasn't from a member state. So if there was a Horizon 2020 or some similar programme where there was money coming direct from Europe, it wasn't state resources. Whereas in the new regime, anything that comes from UK government or any bodies like us that are funded from government will be treated as public resources. I'm actually not sure, and I don't know if you've got an opinion, Melvin, on what would happen because there can still be large cooperation projects now. So if you do get yourself involved, you know, inter European or other, so there's provision within the Trade and Cooperation Agreement to be involved in large cooperation projects. So if they were getting EU funding and we were having beneficiaries benefiting from that, I'm not sure how they would be treated, to be honest now.
No, I think the presumption anyway is that in order to get the EU funding, it would comply with the EU state aid rules anyway. So it becomes a non-issue, really, I think.
Yeah. So it's anything from UK public sources. Alison, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Mary, I was just on that. Talking about the National Lottery, is that going to continue to be a public sector?
Yeah. So good question. So anything where for those of you who don't know the background, the lottery was a bit of a grey area for many years because, of course, the funding comes from the general public paying for the tickets. But because the strategic decision making around how the lottery funds are used is influenced by the UK government, then it becomes under the control of the government. So it's treated as public funding.
Thanks, Mary.
So that's your rule of thumb. You know, if you've got organisations like Scottish Futures Trust, which are a fund, but it's Scottish government, it looks as though it's independent, but it's actually Scottish government funding, and they're controlling how it's used. So that's your rule of thumb. You know, is the strategic control with the government or a government body.
Including, it's worth noting there that the Shetland fund was a more controversial, the oil fund, but it's really, if it's not controlled by legislation, the government may actually have the power to appoint directors of the organisation, and that's enough. If there's a majority of directors who can make decisions have been appointed by the state, well then that makes it a state resource, state controlled.
And Highland was an awkward one for a while because it was kind of 50-50 directors were councillors, and yeah. So if you get that, that's so play safe. You know, if it's a kind of 50-50 thing like that, then you would treat it as public, and only if there's a minority, treat it as private. So the third one is exactly the same. Is the assistance going to provide an economic advantage? So is it going to give the beneficiary something that they wouldn't normally receive for free in the normal course of events? So we usually treat money, if we're giving cash grant, then that's obviously a financial advantage. But for the non-financial interventions, that's the one where we usually look at whether it's something that they could research themselves on the internet. Is it something that a professional services, you know, solicitors or accountants might run a free webinar on something as a kind of marketing and awareness raising thing? So that's a kind of cut off. Are they getting something that they wouldn't normally get for free without our support? And then the next one is more or less the same, but just again different language. So before we were talking about, was it selective, and now is the terminology, is it specific, and aimed at certain economic actors or groups of, you know, one or more economic actors working together. And for the TCA, it's those that are involved in providing goods or services. So that's all of our client base basically. And what this is looking at is whether something is available to every economic actor within the UK, regardless of the sector or regardless of the area. So things like, although it's a bad example because it's COVID related anyway, but things like the furlough scheme that was available to absolutely everybody. If there was any tax breaks or tax incentives that came out, they were available to all sectors across the UK. Modern apprenticeships that we used to talk about, those sorts of assistance. So generally speaking, if it's something that's at highest discretion, then it's only available to our clients in our area, or even if it's Scottish Government money, you know, that's available Scotland wide, then it's going to be specific. And definitely if it's aimed at a particular sector or an individual discretionary award. You looked like you were going to come in there, Melvin.
No, I was just moving around. There is a point I would bring in about the effect on trade, but you haven't got to it yet.
Just the next one. Yeah. So the next one, if you remember, we had to always look at whether the assistance was likely, you know, or had the potential to affect trade. So it couldn't be completely hypothetical, but if somebody wasn't exporting, but the market that the sector they were operating in and the market they were operating, others exported, then they had the potential to do that. So now it's slightly different. Will the assistance have, or could it have, an effect on trade or investment between the UK and the EU? So the test there is, it's more, or is it likely that, or it's more that they're going to have an effect and could actually do some harm to a competitor or to trade between, or investment between the EU states and the UK. Is this where you wanted to come in, Melvin?
Yeah, as an aside, really, there are two views on how strongly effective trade has to be. There was a very intemperate response last week by the Commission to the UK proposals that they wanted to modify the Northern Ireland Agreement, Article 10, which introduced state aid. But as part of that, the Commission made it quite clear that their interpretation of the TCA is that any economic advantage to an undertaking that trades, and if it's involved in any international trade, is bound to affect international trade, which is the original EU position. So although the UK is trying to push this line that it has to be a material and actual effect, the Commission is still trying to argue, as of last week, very strongly that just giving an economic advantage is going to affect trade unless it is an exclusively UK trade that the company is involved in. So just watch this space. I can quite see this debate is going to, it's going to crystallize, I think, over the next few months, and we could end up, having to retrench a little bit if the EU gets its way.
But this currently, that all of this wording on the right-hand side is what's been agreed between the EU and the UK as part of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Now, what's in the bill that might be coming into law next year, but obviously bills can be subject to change and negotiation, is similar. Subsidy means public resources, directly or directly, so that's covering whether it's grants or whether it's forgiveness of debt or free support. Economic advantage, specific, and then look what's been added in. So we've got is it capable of having an effect on trade and investment, but competition or investment within the UK. So this is the whole levelling up agenda and ensuring that that there's no subsidy wars and subsidy races within the UK to sort of get businesses relocating. But what that means in terms of guidance that will come out about displacement and how far we have to do displacement assessments remains to be seen. So as Melvin was just saying, it's a watch this space. But for now, this is not law, so we're continuing to operate the way that we did and just doing our normal displacement assessments as we did before. So we're going to have a look at some of the tests and the examples that we did. So it's just a reminder, because I've had a few people that either haven't got their home toolbar switched on in Word or haven't spotted this little button up the top. So when you open the Subsidy Control Assessment template, you might see it like this. And if you're Fiona and if you're Alan, that's the way you like to see it.
We're not. Are we seeing it? Oh yeah.
Yeah. But if you turn on this show hide button, then you'll get all these blue italic guidance notes that will show you how to that explain what we want you to cover in each box, and then you can switch it off when you're done once you've populated these bits, and it'll revert to that. But if you're wondering why there's no guidance, it's probably because you haven't got that switched on. So let's have a look at some of the examples that we covered before. I've cut this down.
That's showing up quite small on my screen. Yes, it's not the screen. Rather, the big screen is you and Melvin. I don't know if that's the same for everybody else, but
not
it's
for
just
me,
in a little box.
It is still quite small.
I'm fine, Fiona.
It's in a little box at the top.
No, I've got it full scale.
Oh.
I just did when I shared my screen. Let's stop sharing and then I'll reshare.
That's it now. That's it now.
Right. Okay.
It still is quite small though, Mary. Can you increase it just a little bit?
It's up at 150%.
There we go. That's fine. Just so it shows up okay for the recording.
So remember, if you were on any of the previous webinars, you would have seen that we discussed Rosemuir Community Development Trust, and their project was doing a mix of, so there's a mix of community resource within the new property that they were going to build, but then they were going to rent out space, commercial office space, and training space so the storage and all the rest of it was more aimed at community groups, whereas who are local market, but the rest of it, because they were entering the property market, then they would be competing with the private sector who operate for profit. So this example, so the guidance is, although you might be putting your yes, no in this column here, please make sure you sort of put a reasonable explanation in here as to why you've reached your conclusion, and especially if it's a mix. So quite often for the programmes staff, part of what you might be doing would be non-subsidy, but some of the activity that's part of the programme might be subsidy, so you have to explain your differentiation. You can either do it here in the table quite quickly and follow it up in this rationale section at 7, or so it's up to you as long as you explain it somewhere within the paper. So there we're talking about, is it from the public's resources? So it could be grant and aid from High, and there could be other public funding of the project, so you might want to mention that. For the economic advantage, it will provide them with a cash resource, and it's going to help them to get into the commercial property market we've got here. So you can see some of it just needs to be a one-liner that confirms why you're saying what you've, or why you've concluded what you have. But for more complex projects, for larger projects, or more where we're putting more funding in, then you might want to make sure that you've fully justified it. And then here, we haven't got a maybe, or we haven't got a partial. So if it's partial, just say yes, but explain in here that there's partial subsidy involved. And then in the rationale at 7.2, this is where you would explain how you have worked out the proportion that's subsidy and non-subsidy in this particular project. One of the other ones that we looked at, and I see is Ali, you're on the call, aren't you? It won't work in PowerPoint, but when you're in Word, I discovered how to get rid of the sections if you've got a non-state aid assessment and you just want to keep the front page of your assessment, and maybe section 7 and get rid of the rest, as I've done here for speed, then you need to have the developer tab on your toolbar, and then you can hit design mode, and that will let you take out all the tables. Because I've been clever and had all these drop down boxes here, it won't let you delete tables. But if you switch on developer, go into design mode, then you can edit out the bits you don't want, and then go back into switch off design mode, and it'll be nice and clean for you.
Thank you, Mary.
So ACME was where we were giving a loan. So that was fairly straightforward. They were a manufacturer. We were giving them a loan at subsidised interest rates, and the terms were below what commercial lenders were providing at the time. Yes, I am showing off, Fiona. So this is an individual award, so there's a sort of single, it's a discretionary to one single applicant, so of course it's specific. And in this example, widgets are traded internationally, and this company was already exporting. But even if they weren't, the fact that widgets are an international commodity, then we would do that. So then you would have your explanation, so leave your explanation in there. This one doesn't particularly because it's a straightforward one. It doesn't discuss the nuances of the subsidy tests. It's more discussing how the loan was calculated. And then we had a programme one, the Food and Drink Tech Hub. So this is a good example where there was 2 highs involved in providing in pursuit of its public purpose for the advisory part of what we're doing. And we're not acting as an economic actor, but for the Tech Hub, where we're providing specialist support hub, subsidy is going to flow through to the clients, so the beneficiaries. So this is one where there's us. If you look at all the parties involved, there's a subcontractor who's going to deliver the advice and the support for us, but they've been procured, so there's no subsidy to them. But the end beneficiaries, some of them will be involved in sectors and markets where there's activity. In fact, they're food and drink businesses, so they're probably all going to be receiving subsidy. So we've explained here that it's got our funding and city region deal funding, and that we're still at the case of looking at which areas will attract subsidy and the costs of them. So it's selective or specific. Sorry, I will keep saying selective. It's specific because it's only food and drink sector clients in the Highland Council area, and because food and drink sector companies are competing internationally, then we would assume that part of it. And then she's gone on further to explain the different bits, different elements, and importantly here that procedures for handling the subsidy assessment will be developed to comply with the TCA. And then Alison and Ali G and I were looking at Nevis Range Base Station, because a lot of the time when we've been having an out in the past and somebody's failed the subsidy definition or subsidy test, it's when they've had it's been a local market activity, and ski centres was exactly one example where they're not really competing with the Alps and overseas ski resorts because of the quality of the snow and all the rest of it. And also some of the criteria that had appeared in case law in the past was that they don't have accommodation. But lo and behold, Nevis Range is now going to start getting involved in providing accommodation. So we've said that, well, in this case, we better play safe because it'll be all year round accommodation as well. So they are getting into a different sector. So as well, not just outdoor leisure, they're now providing accommodation. So we've had to explain that there and say that, yes, there would be subsidy. Going back to the slides then briefly. So as always, when you're conducting your assessments, just make sure that you consider each question and don't just click the yes or no on the right hand side without actually considering why you're doing that. We still see assessments coming through with the right conclusion but for the wrong reason, so we're trying to get you to get the right reasons in there. So make sure you can back up your response with comments in the paper, and don't assume that because you've completed the response it's enough without backing it up. Don't write War and Peace if you're just running, a short, low-value paper. Make the explanation proportionate, and you don't have to repeat stuff that's in the appraisal paper in that section 7.2. You can reference it, and if you're any doubt at all, come and ask us. The guidance, just as a reminder, from the front page, all the subsidy guidance is available from the top, or the link at the side, and that will take you to the subsidy control page. And the training resources, David Rudge has just got the last 2 refresher sessions from last week, got them on YouTube for me, so I will add to this section and give you the links to these slide decks and the recordings of the refresher sessions as well. And Q&As are also on that training resources. We're up to question 52 now. and surgeries are running 3 days a week. Paul, Cairngorm might yet look into similar investments in the ski sector, either through High or CMSL as subsidiary, so watch this space. Yes, and CML we have to be uber cautious with because, you know, of our connection to them as well. I rather suspect that the local market activity, for the reasons of explaining, you know, we're going to have it revisit this whole area because of the UK subsidy control and what they feel about levelling up within the UK. There are not many ski resorts out with Scotland, but there must be something in Snowdonia, is there?
Even in the Peak District, there's the odd very small ski facility. Yeah.
And then we might even be in the territory of competing with dry ski slopes and indoor ski. So you've got to think about what's substitutable. Did I get that right? I think I got that right. Substitutable services and facilities. Anybody got any other questions? I've only left 2 minutes, I'm sorry.
Switch the recording off, maybe.
All right, good plan.
I'm Barry Melvin, thank you.